Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I didn't notice the last snow melt off the access road until the plows stopped coming. Fort Davis Signal Command lived in a fold of the Colorado Rockies, where the wind could pass for a power tool. A dry whine sliding across the skin of the old ski lodge we used as a false front. Inside, the mountain had been cored and paneled into corridors of epoxy and steel. The ski lift towers still stood, their cables slack and harmless. The parking lot was salted and empty except for 3 white contractor SUVs and a government sedan that came on Fridays and left after lunch without anyone seeing who drove it. My badge called me Data Assurance Specialist, but anyone who could find the uplink room would know I was a drone surveillance analyst with a global footprint. I verified what our automated system claimed to see: ships, rail yards, road convoys, pressure ridges on Arctic ice, night markets in central China shot through a synthetic aperture suite that gave our eyes a kind of X-ray patience. I signed an NDA thick enough to hold open a blast door. My desk sat in a skiff with a line of sight to the coffee machine and none to the outside world, which felt on brand. A week before the first public alerts, the sky over the Rockies was nail clean and the temperature fell into the teens after sunset. I had 12 hours on nights. Drones passed overhead I would never see because they flew too high to recognize and too quiet to hear. The main wall in my bay was a mosaic of feeds that slid and settled like metal cards in a shuffling machine. Ports, highways, wind farms, border crossings. The SAR feed I was auditing that night came from a system tasked for disaster mapping over southern Shanxi, China. The cover reason was seasonal flooding. The images were sharp as puzzle pieces snapped together by a child who never lost a piece. SAR doesn't show things the way a human eye does. It builds the world from microwave returns, making shape out of interference and shine. It likes metal and flat surfaces, hates water unless you want to see boats sliding over black glass. On my screen, T-rows looked like combed cloth. A cluster of people moved along a dirt track between fields. The software tagged them with pale blue boxes, walkers, no vehicles. The AI labeled the behavior as protest. It did that sometimes. It projected a category when it couldn't resolve a pattern, and the training set offered the nearest neighbor. But the thermal overlay, stitched from a lower altitude platform, showed the kind of heat you expect from open ground late in the day. The people didn't bloom with temperature like they should have. Not cold, not warm, just off, like the calibration for human thermal bloom had slid half a step sideways. I wrote, "Anomaly in thermal signature. Individuals moving without characteristic heat distribution." Then I added the number of walkers, the direction, the timestamp, and the file reference. I compared it against the rural clinic 2 kilometers to the west. The clinic had power, monitored by a line graph like an EKG on the second screen. The generator spiked every 9 minutes. That suggested a load somewhere that demanded a surge or a reset. There was no external event to explain it. The drone laddered up, took a second look, and the people were gone. The AI refiled the moment as resolved. I don't get paid to be poetic, I get paid to be accurate. I clipped the 30 seconds and sent it to my review queue with a note to check again in the morning. Then I set a watch list on that sector and poured another cup of coffee from a pot that tasted like the inside of a standing pipe. The overhead fluorescence hummed a phrase I'd been hearing since I started. "We are alive. We are alive." The mantra room had the same song. What you need to understand is how easy it is for a pattern to be misfiled in a system that must sort the entire globe into bins. We categorize for survival. That's our advantage. and our trap. 2 nights later, the watch list pinged for a port on the Mediterranean. The port of Marseille was a known tangle of cranes, ferry terminals, fish markets, and a forest of masts. Our tasking for maritime traffic had been quietly expanded after an eastbound cargo line missed 3 scheduled position confirmations. The feed came from a high-altitude UAV with a wide-area motion sensor fused into a synthetic aperture backbone. The image resolution wasn't spy movie clean. It was better in a way that mattered. You could track patterns across hours, see how a yard breathed, how a dock crew moved, how forklifts stitched their needlework among containers. 2 multi-deck vessels approached the breakwater with unequal speed. The lid ship, the wake steady, no rudder input. The shadow at its bow had a jitter I didn't like. Crews from a third vessel cut their moorings and ran for the quay. The port's pilot boats didn't move. The tracked crew clusters flowed stern to bow, then scattered and vanished into the maze near the fish market. The incoming ship kissed a fender and drifted sideways into a berth like a thing pushed by an invisible hand. Nobody ran to tie her lines. She sat. The AI said crew abandonment likely due to chemical incident, pulled from training data where ammonia leak had once run people off a deck in seconds. That label landed with the hollow confidence a guest can carry when it uses the right words. I put the clip next to the T-fields and it made a short stack of unrelated weird. I added a line. Check crew thermal signatures. The answer came back empty, not because nobody was there, but because nobody who boarded or left registered the way they should. Some of the figures out on a dock were cooler than the ambient air. Not colder in a way you expect from wet clothing or metal benches. Just wrong. On shift handoff, I flagged it for my counterpart in the mornings. A guy named Nikhil who had a knack for catching the one thing in a haystack that didn't belong. He smiled like he had slept in a chair for the past 10 years and drank smoothies he made himself in the break room, full of spinach and banana and effort. He took the note, nodded, and said, "I'll take a look. Then I'm going outside to see the mountain. Try it sometime." He didn't mean it as an insult. He meant it like a neighbor handing you a ladder when you didn't ask for one. Week 1 slid into week 2. The tasking changed in ways it always changes when a contract matures. More domestic incident requests slid in from various agencies, all sanitized through the proper legal clearances, all annotated with harmless reason codes. Tornado survey, wildfire risk, floodplain recheck. Where we'd once flown a line every 2 weeks, we now had line work every 2 days. The mosaic on my wall filled with towns I knew from nothing except the shape of their cul-de-sacs. One night, a flat Kansas grid lit up like a motherboard. Domestic, tornado debris validation, the code said. A man walked out into a backyard and looked up into a sky the camera couldn't see, moving with the slow caution people carry after a storm. He had a jawline like a steel bracket, clean-shaved, in a shirt with a Little League logo. He turned. A part of his face wasn't where it should have been. He wasn't bleeding. He wasn't reacting to it. He moved like an errand on a list. The clip got sealed 5 minutes after I filed it. The status code changed to "Do not distribute internal routing only." My ticket closed with a smoothness that felt mechanical. When I checked the log to see who had taken it, the chain ended in a gray box we used for work that didn't have a name. On my next shift, another analyst pulled me aside. She wore her hair in a tight knot that made her look severe until she laughed. She laughed often before the nights got long. "You seeing the tags?" she asked, keeping her voice low enough that the microphones on the ceiling would hear but the software might dismiss. "The DND ones? Yeah." She pressed a thumb above her badge where it lay against her lanyard. "Don't talk about it. I got a reminder." So did Nikhil. Reminder. NDA refresher, mandatory, 30 minutes. We got cupcakes." She smiled without humor. "The frosting had little gold flecks. Did you know that's a thing? Gold frosting? Memos that taste like sugar." The retraining module arrived on my terminal an hour later. It read like all the others. Protect classified sources and methods. Route anomalies to the designated desk. Never withdraw data to personal media. Refer media inquiries to the public affairs liaison, who we did not have. Honor legal restrictions. Then there was a new page. It had a title about information hygiene and a warning to avoid speculative analysis that could undermine confidence in validated pipelines. The cubicled phrasing landed like a hand on the back of my neck. The module congratulated me when I finished and printed a certificate with my name spelled correctly. The printer made a sound like it was chewing a stick. That night I pulled a set of telemetry files I wasn't supposed to touch. It wasn't exactly a hack, it was the system as designed. We could open raw returns if our job demanded it. My job didn't, but it also did, as long as I needed to check if the processed product had dropped anything important. The console log would record that I'd looked. That, too, was part of the design. Accountability layered over the top of trust. The files showed motion vectors stamped over bodies tagged in a casualty cleanup after an earthquake drill. The drill had been in Eastern Europe. The motion continued after the time the drill ended, after the biometric used to declare time of death was recorded. The movement wasn't the kind of twitch you get from a limb releasing tension. It was deliberate and wrong. Micro-steps, wrists flexing, fingers hooking the ground and dragging, chins lifting against gravity without aid. The AI labeled these post-declaration movements as equipment error and assigned a red tag to remind the system to ignore them next time. The label was new, not the color, the category. If you stare at the world long enough through a machine that translates the world to things you can count, you start to mistrust your own brain when it tries to do the same. I watch the vectors. I check the timestamp against the facility's atomic clock. I check the calibration metadata. I check the GPS fix for drift. Everything was clean. The bodies moved after they should have been still. The same night, just before I took my second break, the intercom announced an incident in Stairwell C. That meant the far end of the second sublevel by the biometric server room with the green light that never went off. A message in the facility app flagged a temporary closure for the stairwell and a request to use the elevator. The security channel, which I kept open on a second headset out of habit, stayed quiet. 10 minutes earlier, I had seen Cody from the opposite shift heading down that stairwell, hugging his laptop like it was his own soft pet. He had a walk like a sleepwalker. He was trembling like the building had a pulse. The next morning, you could smell a bleach burn in the air and hear the kind of forced lightheartedness in the hallway conversations that amounts to a memo with a smile. The official line was fall. The unofficial line didn't exist because nobody spoke it. The monitors kept humming. The mountain passed wind over our skin. When the infection finally came to Fort Davies, it didn't ride the wind. It arrived in a shipping crate the size of a compact car, escorted by 2 plainclothes medical staffers and a team of contract guards who dressed like the color gray had filed a patent. The crate went through one man-trap and halted at the second when the biometric scanner demanded a code it had not seen before. The paper manifest said the crate contained a non-ambulatory research subject, which is a phrase that can hold almost any horror if you let it. The routing code traced back to a lab in Maryland whose initials you would recognize from a documentary. I didn't see the crate. I was in the skiff writing a cross-Q note to myself about heat signatures. But I heard the chime that meant a security override had been requested. I heard the response. Denied pending personnel check. I heard the guard on the radio say he was going to open the outer lock to verify the seal. In training, there's a page about unintended triggers. If someone says don't, your body tenses. If someone says stay calm, you stop breathing for a second to inventory your heartbeat. If someone says do not tell, your brain weighs the cost of obedience against the weight of what it has seen. The message that swam through the facility air that night wasn't don't tell, but it tasted the same. The personnel check got cleared by someone who signed with a title and no name. The guard opened the lock. The crate opened back. I didn't see the first seconds. I saw the aftermath on a camera mounted to the ceiling that fed a window on my console. The two guards, who had their hands on the lid, went down like a pair of floor lamps knocked to the carpet. The plainclothes medics stepped back. One slipped. The movement was too fast to parse. Then the camera cut. The feed came back to show an empty threshold and a smear like someone had run a rag across glass. The corridor alarm tripped. The door to the second man-trap slid shut, caught on a boot, and stopped, half-sealed. An empty cut of air holding its place like a missing tooth. The facility shifted into lockdown with the crisp speed of a drill. That's how they keep you alive even when the system fails. Habits stitched into muscle. Blast doors kissed steel. A pre-recorded voice told us to hold positions. I heard someone in the security room say something you'd hear in a hospital when a piece of equipment doesn't behave the way the manual promises. The facility air handlers slowed to low. Our door motors groaned. The lighting tilted to a cooler spectrum. The coffee machine stopped mid-complaint. We had 3 choices the moment the doors sealed. We could bunker in the skiff and trust that the security team would clear the corridor. We could try to reach the uplink room, which sat 1 level up and 2 corridors over, and broadcast what we had amassed before someone pulled the plug. Or we could get to the comms tunnel and take the crawl out to daylight with whatever we could carry. I'm a decent person, but I'm not brave in the way people mean when they tell a story. I don't run towards a sound without knowing what it is and what my hands can do to it. My hands can carry. They can type fast. They can write an explanation that survives cross-examination. They are not good at wrestling a thing that doesn't recognize what a rule is. I looked at the wall of screens. If I left, whatever lived there would be gone. If I stayed, whatever had opened that crate might arrive at my door before anyone could explain why we were still working. So I did what I had been doing for 3 weeks. I made a plan designed to satisfy 2 opposite demands at once: tell and survive. Our skiff had a secondary door that led to a small vestibule with a fire hose, a carbon dioxide extinguisher, and a panel labeled for waterless fire suppression. The trick in a place like Fort Davies is to imagine every risk has a kind of radiation and set your boundaries accordingly. Fire takes oxygen. Sprinklers take hardware. People take information. The door into the vestibule had an exit latch that could be wedged with a plastic shim if you were willing to file the shim down until it fit beneath the latch tongue. I'd seen a tech do it to ferry coffee in and out when the badge reader blinked red. I had 3 shims taped under my desk. I pocketed 2. I also put a small SSD into my pocket. Yes, I know, never withdraw. But the rule has a larger purpose than the words printed on the page. If the system is telling you to ignore the truth it already contains, the only way that truth gets out is if it rides out on your person. My SSD had no label. I had wiped it after a movie night for a file transfer that never happened. I slid it into an inner pocket on my jacket and tried not to feel the way the outline of the thing became the shape of a decision. Hold position, the intercom repeated. Security incident in progress. The tone was a patient hallway nurse. I told the people in my bay I was going to the restroom. Nikhil looked at me and didn't look away fast enough. We were a small team. Lies stood out. The analyst with the tight knot of hair raised her eyebrows like we were playing cards. "Copy," she said. "Hold your nose. They haven't fixed the vent." "On it," I said, and took my mug with me like that would make the story feel more true. In the vestibule, I wedged the latch and opened the door an inch. The corridor beyond was silent in the way that only a sealed space can be, full of air but empty of breath. The floor had a fine tracery of something like bread flour along the baseboards. I realized it was the dust the building hadn't moved since the day it opened, knocked loose by the lockdown shutter. I listened for the song of the motors and heard them in the floor like a body's hum. My plan had 3 steps: get to the archive bay, pull the packet of flagged clips into a single set so the uplink wouldn't choke on a dozen little asks. Then get up to the uplink room by the service stairs. If the uplink room was blocked, peel left to the comms tunnel. If security saw me and asked where I was going, tell them I was responding to a data integrity check for the backup. True enough to pass a microphone, untrue enough to pass a soul. The first door opened cleanly. The second stuck. That was a blessing. You trust stuck doors in a crisis more than you trust doors that give. Stuck has a cause you can name. Slippery is what happens when something on the other side decides you should come in. At the corner, by the biometric server room, where Cody had gone 2 nights ago, someone had left a rolling trash bin half in the hall. That didn't happen by accident. Our cleaning staff came during the day and moved like a ballet designed by a person with an obsession for order. I edged up to the bin and used it like a shield. The skiff door behind me stayed propped. Footfalls inside the server room. Not boots. Not the efficient click of a woman in shoes that meant business. Bare soles on epoxy make a sound like a damp mitten brushing glass. My chest did the small earthquake thing where it rattled the keys in my pocket. I looked down, surprised by the sound of my own life. "Security," a voice called from the far end of the corridor. "All non-essential personnel, return to your work areas." The voice belonged to a guard who had smiled at me exactly once when we were both in line for lunch, and the credit card machine demanded a signature in a box that was too small for the pen. He carried a rifle slung across his chest, not pointed at anything. His name tag said Reed. He had a calm that felt like practice. He saw me peeking around the bin and threaded his way toward me. "Sorry," I called. "Data archive. I thought this was the fastest way." My mouth moved before my head could assess whether that was a good line to run. He took 1 measure of the server room door, 1 measure of my badge, and 1 measure of the bin. "Return," he said, more to the corridor than to me. "We have it handled." He had a radio at his shoulder. It stayed quiet. He did not smile. Behind Reed, just for a second, a shadow crossed the far end of the hall where the man-trap's second door stood half-closed against a boot. The shadow moved with the kind of patience a set trap exhibits when the wind has its way with it. "Copy," I said, and tipped my mug like a salute. When I looked back down, my hand shook. The coffee made a pond at the cup's lip and then sat, flat as a mirror. I returned to the skiff like a good employee. I left the latch shim in place. I closed the inner door and the outer door caught the shim and did not seal. We had built redundancies this facility would be proud to know it had never needed. I had cut one of them. Back in the bay, an email waited for me with a subject line that owed its life to a committee. Data Workflow Posture, New Routing Protocols. The text told me that effective immediately, all flagged anomalies were to be routed to a new mailbox. The address was a string of letters and numbers that might have spelled out a phrase if you were the sort of person who saw patterns in cereal. The note was signed by our program manager, a man named Brewer who wore nice boots and shirts that never wrinkled even under body armor he pretended he didn't own. The email had a CC to a government address with a domain that ended in a familiar 3 letters. I clicked reply and typed a question about whether this was a drill. I deleted it. I typed instead, acknowledged. Minutes accumulate like receipts when you're trying to decide if you'll be the person who starts a fire. After a while, the alarm tone on the wall changed. The facility voice said, "All staff, remain in place," which was 2 words longer than before. Then it added another sentence, "All staff, avoid stairwell C." It didn't tell us why. It never did. "Elevators are down," the analyst with the knot said, scanning the building status panel like she had a map the rest of us were missing. "Both cars are stopped, 2nd level." Nikhil watched the message and the feed from the man-trap on his secondary monitor. "Boot is gone," he said. "Door shut." Something moved in the reflection on his monitor from the glass of the fire panel. Reflex is a gift. He lowered his head. The object bounced off the wall where his face had been. It landed on his desk, rolled, and tapped my elbow. It was a small socket wrench the size of my thumb. It had grease on the hex. My brain did the math from sound to speed and assigned it the vector of a hand, not a throw from distance. The thing hadn't fallen. Someone had knuckled it along the wall like a toy car. "Okay," Nikhil said quietly. "Okay." He slid his chair back by inches. He put his hand on the keyboard like it was an anchor. The wrench sat on my desk. You could see where the grease had smudged the markings, 10 mm. The running joke, the one size you never find when you need it. Someone wanted us to laugh. That someone wasn't a comedian. I stood. The facility announced a temporary integration test of the air handling units, which is a way to tell the staff the air might smell a little different for a moment as the system rebalanced a pressure set point. That phrase would have been comforting any other night. The vents whispered and reset. The door to stairwell C knocked once and then stopped, like someone had misjudged a step in the dark. When you are being told to be quiet with the voice of a building, the only way to satisfy both your fear and your responsibility is to be precise. I made a mirror packet of the flagged clips on the system and built a manifest. I included every internal memo that had used the phrase information hygiene. I added 3 clips I had not been asked to analyze. Security footage from the research area 2 levels down, which had been sealed for renovations I'd never seen anyone perform. The clips showed a room with 2 stainless examination tables and lighting bright enough to show fingerprints on glass. It also showed a crate. It also showed 2 people in plain clothes with gloves standing with their hands on the lid. The timestamp on the clip was less than an hour old. The lid rose. A hand emerged not like a hand, but like a clamp searching for purchase. I paused the clip there. I could not include a moment I could not explain, and still call the packet a document meant for the public. The packet was evidence. Evidence is a surgeon, not a poet. I needed the uplink room. If the uplink was blocked, I needed the comms tunnel. If the tunnel was blocked, I needed legs enough to carry me beyond the line where the building could talk to my badge reader. "Where are you going?" Nikhil asked. He kept his voice low enough that the air swallowed it. "Back up," I said. "Manual." "Take this," he said, and slid a pocket knife toward me. It was legal to carry. It was unthreatening. It had a skinny blade and a clip that grabbed a pocket like it meant to climb. "Also, this," he added, unplugging a USB stick the size of a stick of gum from his keyboard. "It auto-encrypts, drops the key when it loses power too long." "You shouldn't." "Neither should you," he said. He looked at the door. "Go." I went. I took the vestibule again and the latch Shim held. I took 3 breaths and made their depth the same. Panic looks like ragged breath on a camera. Calm looks like measured lift. I went left instead of right this time, and moved along the wall with one hand brushing the seam like a person learning a room in the dark. If you have never seen a facility like Fort Davies in an emergency, Here is what it looks like. The lights step down one notch to buy the batteries more minutes. The exit signs choose a narrower spectrum like fish in deep water. The green LEDs on server racks blink in unison like small towns signaling across a valley. The wall phones sit there like museum pieces, ready to speak but never ask to. Doors tell you stories about what lies beyond them in the scuffs and smears at their bases. One door had a streak that wasn't a scuff or smear. It was a set of digits scratched by something harder than paint. 1213, pressed into the lower right corner where someone kneeling might leave a message for anyone willing to kneel. The uplink room's door had 2 badges and a biometric and a keypad. The keypad had a plastic cover to discourage oily finger memory theft. I slid the cover up. Someone had taped a small rectangle of paper inside, where you'd never see it unless you were scofflaw enough to check. On the paper, 1213. Next to it, written in a thin felt-tip line, "We're not the bad guys if we keep track." It had a tiny doodle of a coffee mug. I knew the mug, the Analyst with the knot. Of course. I keyed the code. I held my badge up and then my hand. The door opened. The room inside hummed like the inside of a seashell pressed to the ear. It had vertical racks, a small counter with a keyboard, and a window the size of a lawyer's smile looking across at a hallway where you could see 2 double doors labeled Roof Access. Someone had propped one of the doors with a folding stop. It had fallen over. I couldn't go up that way. The camera in the corner had a red LED. It hadn't had a red LED last week. I wondered who had decided to wire one in and why they thought a light that promised recording would be a deterrent and to whom. The uplink used to schedule like a bus line, regular windows when satellites were in view. The next pass was 11 minutes out. I queued the packet, inserted Nikhil's stick, mirrored the packet to the stick and to my SSD, and authenticated the send with a code that lived in my head and had never lived in my phone. The facility voice came alive again. "All staff, remain in place." Then a second sentence. "Connectivity is being evaluated." That was not a good sentence. Someone outside shouted. The shout cut off and returned 2 pitches lower, like a drill had slipped from a screwhead and chewed into softwood. I decided not to map metaphors to sounds anymore. I would go insane faster that way. I locked the uplink queue and slid the manual override cover off the transmission switch. It wasn't dramatic, a toggle labeled "For investigation use only." You were supposed to run tests. I was going to run a test. I flipped it. The system asked for a reason code. I typed "audit." Then I added, without meaning to, "I'm sorry." A set of footprints appeared under the window outside, not because there was dirt to record them, but because a fine layer of whatever powdered the baseboards had collected on the wax and the soles had tracked clean paths through it. The doors to the roof moved a centimeter. The centimeter became an inch. The inch stopped. The person walking by didn't push it farther. They moved on. The red LED thought about what it was seeing without telling me what it decided. The uplink path opened 5 minutes ahead of schedule. That never happens, which is why you always leave room for miracles in your calculations. The schedule gave me a pass to one of the middle birds we rented time on. It wasn't a high-band channel, but it could carry text and low-res imagery as long as I stacked the bits well. I compressed the packet. I moved one clip to the head of the line. The T-fields. I wrote a text header with all the boring parts that make a thing admissible. Timestamps, sensor IDs, calibration files, software platform, hash values. Evidence does not scream. It whispers verifiable facts. The hash turned a corner in my head and became a prayer. I sent the packet to 2 places. One was a mailbox inside our own system. I had no reason to trust this would help, but it helped me to remember that sometimes you leave breadcrumbs in the house you're trying to escape. The second was an address built from a pattern I'd seen in a Federal Safety Bulletin distribution list 2 years earlier. A general address that routed to a rotating analyst at a place whose job it was to swallow scary truths and return them to the public as warnings about tires and toasters. I figured the hardest job in the world was going to belong to the person who opened their inbox and saw what I had sent. I figured they deserved to be part of the circle. The packet left, the green bar filled. The facility shuddered once, like it remembered a deeper earthquake. The red LED in the corner noticed my soul had the shape of a person in an uplink room sending data during a lockdown. The loudest sound in the room was the low clatter of my teeth when I swallowed. I had to leave. The uplink would log me. The log would give someone with a badge and a better title than mine the excuse to ask me to explain myself. If the someone wore gray, the conversation would be short. If they wore a smile, it might be longer. I didn't want either. I took the service corridor toward the comms tunnel. At the junction, a cart sat with a tray of sealed plastic tubs labeled with a date and the letters MRE. I had eaten one once during a drill. The crackers could hold a building. I grabbed a packet of peanut butter. I didn't know when I would next get to eat a meal that had a bowl under it. A man in a lab coat stood by the water fountain. He had a small scrape on his forehead and a look in his eyes like he had misplaced a thought. He turned his head slowly. His face was uncannily calm. He smelled like cold metal. "You okay?" I asked before I knew I would. He didn't answer. He stared at the sound of my voice like the speaker on the wall had come alive. He took one step toward me, placing his foot heel to toe with the precision of a line painted on a court. He took another. I stepped back. I lifted the carbon dioxide extinguisher from the cart's lower shelf. It was heavy. It had a handle and a hose. Tools are a comfort when nothing else is. "Stop," I said, and made my voice a thing I could hold. He took a third step. I squeezed the handle. The extinguisher coughed cold into the air. A white plume, like a winter breath you could climb inside. The man reached into it. His hand did not flinch. The cold rolled over him and came back toward me. I angled the plume to make a cloud between us and stepped past him quickly, my shoulder brushing his sleeve. His head turned to follow the growl of the cylinder as I placed it down on the floor. I moved along the wall, quick, without pretending I was a hero. My heart kept a fat drum in my chest. If you fight something in a corridor with a heavy cylinder as your landmark and your promise, you keep it between you and the thing you distrust. You make the space smaller for it and larger for you. People told me later you can't think like that if you weren't trained. They are wrong. Fear is an accelerant for clarity if you give it a shape to run in. At the comms tunnel door, my badge reader blinked yellow. The mechanical key override had a lock that used a key with a shallow cut profile. We had 2 keys. Maintenance had one. Security had the other. I had nothing but a pocket knife and an SSD full of someone else's secrets. Before I could decide whether to go back for a key I could not imagine a safe way to obtain, the door clicked and opened. The person on the other side held it with their shoe. A scuffed sneaker with a piece of gaffer's tape covering a tear. "Come on," she said. The knot of hair. "They're going to roll back the uplink log in about 3 minutes and then come here to decide what else to turn off." She looked past me at the corridor. "You carry your own air?" She nodded at the extinguisher. "Briefly," I said. I showed her the SSD in my pocket like a child showing a permission slip. I sent it. "I know, I left you the code," she said. "You're not the only person here who paid attention to patterns while collecting them." Her name was Anna. She joined the team 4 months before I did. In that time, she had corrected my math twice and my pronunciation once. "Head out the tunnel," she said. "It comes out at the maintenance shed by the old snowcat barn. The exterior camera loop is still on from this morning. If you stay low, the motion algorithm will write you down as a tumbleweed. What about you? I'm not done, she said. They put a new routing address in the protocol. You saw it? The one with the alphabet soup and the government domain. The soup uses a pattern the AI learned from us, she said. If the AI learned it from us, it can unlearn it. I taught it that trick at 3 a.m. when the building thought I was watching training videos about zipper merges. She checked the corridor again. Go. Come with me, I said. She looked at my pocket, understood, and shook her head. I told you, not done. She handed me a radio, not a slick digital, a cheap analog. Channel 3, she said. Push to talk, let go to listen. If you hear music, that's me. If you hear quiet, run faster. What music? Anything I can get the building to play, she said, and smiled for the first time that night. It looked like a person opening a window. Go. The comms tunnel felt like the throat of the mountain. It was a rectangle broken by pipes and cable trays and the kind of spider webs that look like fixer's tape from a distance. It was not built to be comfortable. It was built to be forgotten. The rubberized floor didn't squeak. The air tasted like cold electronics. The radio hissed once like a cat and then breathed in static. I crawled when the pipe trays lowered. I walked hunched when they let me. I kept the SSD pressed flat under my jacket. I counted junctions because counting slows panic. I reached the grate at the far end and found the bolts had been cut enough to twist by hand. I put my shoulder to the grate and pushed. It rose enough to stick a hand through and then an arm. Snow, from the morning, sat in a shadow under the eaves of the maintenance shed, the crystals unmelted by sun that had not reached this far back. I slid out like a mechanic leaving a job under a car. The maintenance yard held a snowcat without tracks, 3 stacks of plow blades, and a forklift whose mast leaned like a man after a long day. The shed door stood open in a polite invitation. Beyond the yard, the mountain's skin rose and fell in timber and rock. We had a perimeter fence. It ran into a gulch and then across a service road and into another gulch. If your goal was to keep deer out, it worked. If your goal was to read the motivations of humans, it told you nothing. I kept low, the way you do when you don't know who is watching. I reached the corner of the snowcat barn and peered around. To my right, the old ski lodge had lit windows like a dollhouse to show you someone was home. To my left, the access road bent around a stand of aspen. The government sedan at the curb had a layer of pine dust on its hood and the kind of license plate frame that said it had never been to a mall. I didn't know where to go. My body hunched by default toward the trees. The radio crackled. A song spilled into my ear. Not a song exactly. A 4-bar loop of a simple melody played on an instrument that might have been a piano or might have been a machine pretending. It was a cell phone ringtone from 10 years ago. It didn't belong in a mountain. It belonged in a pocket, in a kitchen, in a house with a refrigerator that made too much noise. It came out of the radio and the vent above the maintenance shed door at the same time. I pressed the button. Anna? No answer. The loop continued. The tune repeated. It was getting louder. Behind me, back down the tunnel, the grate moved 2 fingers width with a noise like a metal cough. I moved, then, not like a stealthy person, but like a person who has left something in a room he doesn't want to visit again. I ran across the yard, down the slope behind the snowcat barn, along the tree line. My legs did not complain. They did not ask for permission. At the road, I stopped because something in my brain still cared to look both ways. 2 men in gray moved along the lodge's back wall, close enough to touch the stucco with their shoulders. One held his rifle with his finger too high on the receiver. The other held his on his sling like an argument. They looked like they had been trained by a video. They looked like people who had never had to make the choice to point at a living thing. They were not the problem, and they were not the solution. The road bent away from the facility and down. If I followed it, I would run into a gate with a camera and an armed guard who had been told to smile. If I cut across the trees, I would reach a line of cabins that belonged to no one in particular and everyone in power. One, I knew, had a router with a brand that shipped with a default password people rarely changed, and a satellite link we borrowed when storms chewed our fiber. I had used it to watch a live ice hockey game during a blizzard 2 winters ago. It was 15 minutes away if my lungs remembered their job. I listened to my hands for a second like I was asking a car if it felt right to drive. They answered by shaking less. Good enough. I made it to the cabin in 11. It had shutters closed against wind, a porch that had accumulated pine cones since summer, and a note taped inside the front window with the owner's handwriting. Back Saturday. Saturday had come and gone. The handle turned. The latch didn't. The back door around the deck had a sliding glass panel with a stick in the track. I lifted the stick with my pocket knife, swore under my breath because it didn't move, then realized it was a trick, stuck to the glass with clear tape. The real stick lay on the floor. I slid it where it belonged, and the door opened. Inside, the cabin smelled like cedar and books left closed for too long. It had a stone fireplace, a leather couch, and a kitchen with a bowl of oranges like the owner wanted to stage the place for a catalog. The router sat on a side table like a pet. The sticker on its side had a default SSID with the kind of name that told you the manufacturer had an aunt named Gloria. I booted my laptop and found the network. The password on the sticker worked. The satellite link connected after a slow count of blinking lights. I used the link to route a copy of the packet to 3 places. The safety bulletin desk again, a newsroom address at a paper that still cared enough to check, and my own cloud drive under the mouthful of a name I had once made after too many hours and too long a sign-up form. It wasn't about becoming famous. It wasn't about being right on the internet. It was about putting a copy in the path where it could not be stuffed back into a crate and rolled down a corridor where nobody walking barefoot could ruin it by accident or design. I wrote a short cover note that read, "I apologize for any policy I violate by sending this. People are in danger. I hope to be wrong." I signed with initials. I had a window into the world that the world did not yet know was breaking. The news sites hadn't caught up. Social media saw a dozen videos of strange scenes that people were explaining away with words about chemical spills and riots and pranks. I didn't know if my packet would make them see. I didn't know if my packet would vanish into a folder like a seed planted in winter. Back at the facility, the radio played nothing. Then it clicked, and Anna's voice arrived like a hand on a railing. "If you can hear this, do not come back through the tunnel. They're checking hard points. They will check the shed. They will check the easiest path to the shed. Do not be easy," she said. Her breath came evenly. She sounded like someone working a problem in a quiet room. "I am heading for the old lift tower. If they ask, I was never here. If they don't ask, you were never here either. Channel 2, now." I clicked to Channel 2. "You hear me?" she asked. "Yes." "Good. I taught the AI to route to a place it used to send bad satellite ephemeris. I buried the packet under the place where gremlins go," she said. "It's going to keep sending until the power goes or until somebody finds the wire I taught it to climb." "You can still get out," I said, because that's the kind of sentence you say when you aren't sure if you want it to be an order or a wish. "I can," she said. "I am making a copy to carry. I am not going to leave the system with nothing to do." She paused. "Remember the wrench." 10 mm, I said. "An old joke," she said. "The thing you need when you need it most that always goes missing. The last thing the system wants us to have is the tool that makes all the other tools fit. Where are you exactly? You don't want to know where exactly, she said. If you get picked up, specificity is a liability. Okay. Do you see the ridge beyond the cabins? She asked. Yes. If you hug that line and stay on the side where the trees block the view of the maintenance yard, you'll be out of camera range for another half-mile. After that, the forest does the job, she said. There's a trailhead for a county road that hasn't been maintained in 12 years. Look for a bulletin board with a map. The plexiglass cover is cracked on the upper right corner. There's a copy of a radio code book taped underneath. Who taped it? We did, she said, surprised I had to ask. Not everything is a secret because someone you'll never meet decided it. Sometimes the secret belongs to the people who looked at the same problem and arrived at the same solution at 3 a.m. without asking for permission. She exhaled. Head that way. I don't know if we're going to have a next time. Anna, don't say my name. Take care of your evidence. Keep your hands warm. Drink water even if you think you aren't thirsty. Put your phone in a metal cookie tin if you find one. If someone tries to be your friend with a badge and a smile, let them be your friend later. If they try to be your friend while asking for your SSD, find a door. You have very bad people and very good people heading toward you. You do not have a test that will tell you which one is which until it's too late. The radio clicked. The static returned. I didn't say goodbye because I understood the function of a goodbye. It's a lid closing. Lids should be avoided in situations like this. I found the trailhead where she said. The bulletin board had a plastic cover with a crack. The county map underneath had the kind of blue lines you can follow with a finger. In the upper right corner, tucked under tape, a folded paper with a list of radio codes from a volunteer search and rescue group. It was clean. It had never been used. It had never been moved. It had been waiting there for a day like today. The first wave of news broke while I stood there with my finger on a line that showed a fire road. A local station in a Midwestern city ran a live shot from a block where nobody moved the way a person moves. The reporter used the word unusual 3 times in 30 seconds. She used the phrase, officials are asking for calm, twice. Calm is what you ask for when you don't know what else to sell. I didn't try to call my parents. I didn't try to call anyone. The facility would have room inside it for my phone call, and the person at the other end would ask me to come in and tell my story calmly and with my hands on the table. I looked at my hands. The knuckles had small white lines where blood refused to go. I put them under my armpits and made them warm. I drank the water from the bottle I had grabbed in a gesture I thought was incidental earlier and now realized had been a good one. The day folded and unfolded like an accordion between the high peaks and the lower slopes. The light settled toward the flat. The cold lifted. The radio code sheet had a number for a channel the county used when it needed to tell fire trucks to avoid a road washed out by snowmelt. I dialed my cheap analog. The frequency opened. The sound that came through was the tired relief of someone who had been doing a job without sleep. County Dispatch, a woman said. If your report is not about blocked roads, medical emergencies, or missing persons, please hold. Do not attempt to drive around barricades. I pressed the button. This is a private citizen, I said. The sentence had a flavor. There are people at a facility up the hill who may need help. There are others at the same facility who will tell you they do not. Copy, she said, not overly surprised. Possibly 100 calls had arrived like mine. Possibly none. It didn't matter. Good dispatchers know how to code results without letting tone infect anything. Who are you? Someone who saw this before you were told, I said. I have sent evidence to 3 points. I may be compromised if I try to reach any of them by phone. I will leave a packet at the trailhead board. It is clearly marked with a blue glove. Tell whoever collects it to wear one." "Sir," she said, the formality of a person who must keep you in the lane where you do no damage. "If you feel unsafe, please move to a safe location. If you are injured, we will attempt to reach you." "Copy," I said. I tucked the SSD into a plastic bag I found in the cabin's kitchen drawer and wrapped it with a blue nitrile glove I had lifted from a maintenance kit 2 weeks ago when I thought I might clean my keyboard. I taped it to the back of the map under the broken corner. I wrote in block letters, #SHA-256, string, verify. I included the string. Anyone could say a thing. Not everyone could give you the way to prove the thing belonged to itself. I slept in a ditch for 20 minutes with my back to a log and my ear on the radio. The tune from earlier didn't return. When I woke, my back had a line of frost down the zipper and my right foot had gone numb. I moved, the way you must when sleep threatens to become an argument your body decides to win while you're not looking. By night, the road below the facility had lights moving in a pattern I knew from 100 emergency response clips. The stoplights held open for a convoy, parking lot floods turned on to make a bright corridor, headlights deliberately dimmed to avoid glare. The news ran a ticker that sounded like a weather alert but for the movement of people. Shelters would open tonight. Hospitals asked for patients. A phrase appeared before midnight like a brand in a movie. It had a clinical weight. It would not leave. It was not ours to control anymore. I didn't go back to Fort Davies. I listened to Anna on the radio twice more in the next 2 days. The first time she said, "If you are hearing this, do not bring your phone into any building with a fence. If someone asks to check it for you, thank them for their service and walk away." The second time, she sang 3 notes and said, "The AI is smarter than they think it is when it knows what the truth feels like. It will tell someone, maybe not us, but someone." I don't know if my packet made the difference, but I saw my words on a screen in a way that let me believe it. A slice of the tea plantation clip aired, blurred, with the tagline, "Independent Contractor Whistleblower Footage." The voiceover used phrases like alleged and purported, and officials declined to comment. It also used the phrase verify. A scientist I had never met said, "The thermal signatures suggest a phenomenon not consistent with current injury or illness models," and did not smile. I moved through the county like a person in a liminal state, not a guest and not a fugitive, sleeping where trees met rock and people didn't go except to tie their boots. I ate the peanut butter with the handle of the pocket knife. I thought about the crater my absence left in the facility's staffing matrix. Someone would have filled it by morning. That's how systems work when they are built to survive people, not to help them. The first time I encountered a single one of them in the open, it was near a bus stop on a county road where no bus had run in 24 hours. He stood with his hand on the pole, face turned to read the route map. Body not shivering though he wore no jacket, and the wind tasted like snow. I stood far enough away that the fine hairs on my arm rose under my sleeve. He turned his head toward the sound of a car in the distance. He did not turn it back. He listened like he could see through his ears. When I stepped on a pine cone, he moved 1 foot toward the noise and then stopped, as if his list for the day had included ride the bus, and he was committed to the idea. My knife was an objection to a world that would not be argued with. I kept it in my pocket. I don't know when the first announcement told the public what I knew. I do know the language softened the edges the way it must when your goal is to ask for patience and cooperation instead of panic. They used the phrase non-responsive individuals. They used keep distance. They used if someone you love does not respond, do not attempt to hold them close. Doctors stood up and looked into cameras with good eyes. The faces in the background looked down and wrote notes that would become policies on the way to becoming stories. I met a small group on the third morning. A woman in a sheriff's jacket with no patches, a man in a baseball cap who walked like he had once carried something heavy for a living and avoided it now because he wanted to sleep at night, a teenager with a dog that had decided it belonged to her and not to anyone else. They rounded the bend on the fire road and stopped when they saw me because I had stepped into the light. The dog decided I was fine and wiggled like a different world was still possible. "We're heading to the high school," the woman said. "They're setting up a shelter, open air where they can, gym if they must." "Right," I said. "You coming?" the man asked, the way people ask a person who looks able to help. "I have something I need to do first," I said. That was true. I needed to keep walking. I needed to keep the small pocket of quiet I had fought for. I needed to hold my evidence like a coat over a shoulder, even if the coat had already done its job. "Okay," the woman said. She had cop eyes that saw your hands and your shoes and your stance. She saw my radio. She saw the way my shoulders carried a careful weight. She did not attempt to take anything. She did not ask for my name. "If you have any information that can help keep people calm, bring it to the school. We'll be there until we can't." "Copy," I said, like a person who's held a radio too long. They left. The dog looked over its shoulder and sneezed. The teenager whistled. The dog returned to the pack with a loyalty you could build a bridge on. At night, the mountain sang a tight, high song as the wind moved through the deadlift cables. The lodge at Fort Davies kept its lights on. The radios at the cabin pulsed a heartbeat nobody had intended to program. The AI inside the facility routed packets until someone in a chair decided to stop it. Then it found a new wire to climb. That's what good code does when its goal is small and clear. A week later, I met a soldier on a trail above a creek. He wore gear that said he had expected to practice in it, but had not expected to use it for real. He had a map in his hand, the paper folded into a rectangle with the creases softened by finger oil. "You're the one who sent the clips," he said, like he had been told to memorize my outline, or one of them. "One," I said. I had no proof. "Thank you," he said. He did not attempt to take anything I had. He did not ask for my SSD. He did not ask me to come back to answer questions. He looked at the creek and then at the trees and then at the sky. "We're not prepared," he said, as if confiding a private thought to a stranger at a bus stop. "We're going to try anyway." "You have people who will coach you," I said, and knew it to be true. People who had been finding the tools nobody could find all their lives would show up. The ones who knew how to keep a list. The ones who knew how to fold a map. "Yeah," he said. He looked at my knife, which had clipped to my pocket out of habit. "If you're around the high school, look for a woman in a sheriff's jacket. She'll keep the air moving the way it should." "I met her," I said. "Good," he said. And then he headed toward the road with the stance of a man who had decided his feet would decide the day. By then, the phrase, "don't tell," had become a practical joke the world told itself. Of course, you should not cause panic. Panic complicates everything with noise. But the antidote to panic is not silence, it is instruction. It is direction. It is the honesty that comes when the person who saw it first tells you the truth and gives you a way to test it. I don't know if I did the right thing early enough. That's not me attempting virtue. That's a statement about the delay built into any system that asks permission to act. I saw it first. I did not shout then. I did not whisper loud enough either. But once the crate in the hallway slid open and the first breath in the wrong register filled our corridor, I stopped waiting to be told and decided to be the person who wrote down what the air said. You don't get closure. The world keeps moving. The drones still fly. The patterns that make our jobs possible shift but do not vanish. The tea plantation in Shaanxi grew green again under a sky that did not care whether the people below it stood still. The port of Marseille unstacked its containers and stacked them again. The man in Kansas with the Little League shirt had a yard that went to seed and then to seed again under a new owner who never learned his name. At Fort Davies, the bulbs in the uplink room burnt out a month later and someone replaced them. The sticker inside the keypad cover with the numbers 1213 stayed where it was. I think about taking it off. I also think about leaving it. A breadcrumb for a person who might someday need to unwind the world back to where it made a choice to learn. Some nights, when the wind crosses the frame of the door, at the cabin where I now sleep when I sleep indoors, the radio wakes. The static carries a phrase, not words, the shape of someone practicing truth. It sounds like Anna breathing in and out while she waits for a window. I answer with silence, which is not a refusal. It is a way of framing the next sentence so the person who needs it can hear. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.